Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh. We're here on Yahweh's Sabbath day. Greetings to those on the internet. We hope you enjoy the messages that go out, or those that might be watching live. Greetings. Today's message is entitled "The Spirit, the Letter, and Circumcision." And I want to start with an opening verse. Let me get a little view of the book here. An opening verse of Romans chapter 6, verse 4. A very interesting verse that is understood by many in different ways. But we're going to try to shed some light on that and see if, and also venture into some of the New Testament spiritual circumcision verses and kind of tie these things and go back and find out what we read in the Old Testament, Torah, Tanakh. Romans chapter 6 and verse 4 says, "Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Messiah was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life." I apologize. One second here. For some reason I wrote down the wrong verse. I was looking for the verse. Oh, there it is. I'm not sure how I did that or why. But that actually, that does kind of tie in. Even so, we should also walk in newness of life. And when we get into this spiritual circumcision thing, that's also newness of life. And didn't mean to write that down, but anyway, let's pick up in chapter 7, verse 6. Romans chapter 7 and verse 6. This was supposed to be the opening verse. "But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in oldness of letter." I've spent quite a bit of time in Romans 6 through 8, and what's actually holding us here in verse 6 is the old nature. We are in bondage to the old nature. I'm not going to get into all that today. I've gotten into it many times before, but what I want to focus on here is the second part of the verse, that we serve in newness of spirit, not in oldness of letter. And some interpret that as, well, the letter's old and done away with. We serve in the spirit. The spirit trumps the letter or fulfills the letter, however they want to do it. But we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper. I want to cross-reference that with another verse that, with these two things combined, you can come up with a really messed up theology. And that's 2 Corinthians chapter 3. That's it. If we were coming up with a cherry-picking theology, I think they call it, where you just pick one or two here and there and come up with a whole mindset. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 6, "Who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life." So, if we were just to look at these two things, there are theologies. Well, the letter was old, the letter kills, but the Spirit saves and the Spirit gives life. Well, the letter only killed when you broke it. That's when it carried the death penalty. And not all of it actually carried the death penalty. There were certain things that actually carried the death penalty. Well, there were even sacrifices for the sins of ignorance. But anyway, let's look at John chapter 4 real quick. The letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. We serve it says we were buried with him so that we could serve in newness of spirit, not oldness of letter. John chapter 4 and verse 24 says, Yahweh is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So he wants us to worship him in spirit and in truth. Let's look at 2 Corinthians chapter 3. I'm sorry, I'm going to flip-flop back and forth, but I wrote these things down as they came to my mind and as I looked them up, so they're not in any particular order. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 17. Says, now Yahweh is that spirit, and where the spirit of Yahweh is, there is liberty. So in both of these verses we looked up, we see that Yahweh is a spirit. John chapter 6 John chapter 6 and verse 63, it is the spirit that quickens, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. So he wants us to serve in newness of spirit, not oldness of letter. Yahweh is a spirit. Yeshua's words are spirit. John chapter 14. John chapter 14 and verse 24. He that loves me not keeps not my sayings, and the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's which sent me. So the Father is spirit, Yeshua's words are spirit, and the words come from the Father. Romans chapter 7 and verse 12. Romans 7 and verse 12. I really love this. If anybody wants to know, Romans 6, 7, and 8 are my favorite chapters in the Bible. I'm not sure why, but I really, really love those chapters. And if you go to one of the classes in the prison, and you were to ask them what's Lee's favorite chapters, every single one of them will tell you Romans 6 through 8. We spend quite a bit of time in those chapters. But anyway, and there's things in these chapters that just, they stand out, but they're so overlooked. For instance, the one we're going to start off with here. Wherefore the law is holy, set apart. The commandment holy and just and good. That means the law and the commandments are righteous. They are a good thing. They're good. Verse 13. Was then that which is good, law, made death unto me? Certainly not. Did you hear that? The law that was good, was it made death unto me? Certainly not. The law was not put there to kill. And I'm cross-reference that with what we read in Corinthians. It says the letter kills. And here it says it wasn't death unto me. So there's something in the understanding that's a little mixed up. Certainly not, but sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceedingly sinful. So the law that was good was put there to manifest sin and to make it appear exceedingly sinful, to point it out. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. The law is spiritual. Yahweh is spiritual. He wants us to worship in spirit. His Son's words are spirit that came from him, and his law is spiritual. And I always like to cross-reference the next chapter that says spiritual people mind spiritual things. So when we see the verse that we started off with, serving in newness of spirit, not oldness of letter, if you were to just look up new and spirit in the Strong's Concordance, you'll come up with some of these verses. Let's go back to Ezekiel chapter 36. Starting verse 21. But I had pity for my holy name, which the house of Israel had profaned amongst the heathen where they went. Therefore say unto the house of Israel, Thus saith my sovereign Yahweh, I do not this for your sakes, O house of Israel, but for mine holy name's sake, which you have profaned among the heathen, whither you went. And I will sanctify my great name. You know, something that just came to my mind while I was reading that. I'm just going to share it. Usually I don't, but I'm going to share this today. It says that Israel profaned his name amongst the heathen where they went. If you do a little history on that, you'll find that they were actually scattered out amongst the heathen. Isn't it interesting that the heathen and those that have been scattered most of them don't even know his name? Kind of hard to profane his name when you don't even know it. And I will sanctify my great name, which was profaned amongst the heathen, which you have profaned in the midst of them. And the heathen shall know that I am Yahweh, saith my sovereign Yahweh, when I shall be sanctified in you before their eyes. For I will take you from amongst the heathen, and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean from all your filthiness, and from all your idols will I cleanse you. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you an heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you shall keep my judgments and do them, and you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I will be your Elohim. A lot of phrases in here are repeated numerous times in other places. You will be my people, I will be your Elohim, the new spirit. But what's interesting here is it says he puts the spirit inside of you and causes you to obey what? The letter. The Spirit causes you to obey the letter. And we started off with serving newness of spirit, not oldness of letter. The Spirit is what is the drive behind obedience to the letter. The letter is not the drive. Next verse. Go back to Ezekiel chapter 11. Starting in verse 16. Therefore say, Thus saith my sovereign Yahweh, although I have cast them far off amongst the heathen, and though I have scattered them among the countries, yet will I be to them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they shall come. Therefore say, Thus saith my sovereign Yahweh, I will even gather you from among the people, and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. And they shall come thither, and they shall take away all the detestable things thereof, and all the abominations thereof from thence. And I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take the stony heart out of their flesh, and will give them an heart of flesh. And Paul goes into great detail in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 about how this actually takes place. He talks about that we are an epistle, not engraven in stones, but engraven in the tablets of the heart. and that this stony heart, talking about the blind portion of Israel, this stony heart has a veil that they can't see. But when the heart turns to the master, the veil is lifted and they see. Anyway, chapter 18 of Ezekiel. Starting in verse 31. Cast away from you all your transgressions, whereby you have transgressed, and make you a new heart and a new spirit, for why will you die, O house of Israel? So even back then he was asking them to have a new heart and a new spirit. For I have no pleasure in the death of him that dieth, saith my sovereign Yahweh. Wherefore turn yourselves and live. And of course, Jeremiah talks about this new covenant where he will put his law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. He will be their Elohim and they will be his people. That's Jeremiah 31, but I'm not going to go there today. A couple verses in the New Testament concerning circumcision. Romans chapter 2. And this is also very misunderstood, which I myself misunderstood this set of scriptures here for a long time. I was under the misconception, the replacement theology that's very prevalent in the churches today. Just by the things that I heard, I thought I was the new Israel, and the old Israel, they killed their Messiah, they had their chance, and now this new spiritual Israel got all the blessings they were supposed to get. And my misunderstanding of this verse in let's look at verse 28 of chapter 2. For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of Elohim. So I thought in my mind, if I had the spirit, then I was a Jew. But that's actually not what he's saying here. He's actually speaking to a Jewish person. If we back that up, he's talking about people that are the tribe of Yehuda, and he's saying that if you truly want to be, if you want to keep your identity, you need to be circumcised in the heart. And for context, if you back that up to verse 17, it says, "Behold, thou art called a Jew." That opens up the understanding of who he's talking to. And then he continues in chapter 3 to say, what advantage do you have as a Jew? And just for context of that here, let's look at, let's start there in verse 17. "Behold, thou art called a Jew, and restest in the law." It means you trust in it. "And make thy boast of Elohim, and knowest his will, and approve of the things that are more excellent, being instructed out of the law, and art confident that thou thyself art a guide of the blind, and a light to them which are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, which hast the form of knowledge and of the truth in the law. Thou therefore which teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? Thou that preachest a man should not steal, dost thou steal? Thou that sayest a man should not commit adultery, dost thou commit adultery? Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege?" So he's talking to a Jewish person here who has the law, who understands the law. He's saying, if you preach these things, do you do it yourself? Are you practicing what you preach? "Thou sayest that a man should not commit adultery. Dost thou commit adultery? Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege?" Verse 23, "Thou that makest thy boast of the law, through breaking the law dishonorest thou Elohim. For the name of Yahweh is blasphemed amongst the Gentiles through you. We actually read scriptures about that, profaning his name amongst the heathen. And how is that done? Verse 23 tells us, you make your boast in the law, but through breaking the law you dishonorest thou Elohim. Verse 25, for circumcision verily profits, if you keep the law. But if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? And shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee who by letter and circumcision dost transgress the law? For he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of Elohim. And then he goes on to say that the Jewish people did have an advantage because they had the word. Colossians chapter 2. Colossians chapter 2 and verse 11. In whom also you are circumcised with the circumcision made without hands. Circumcised without hands, in the putting off of the body of sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Messiah. So here he's telling us that a circumcision of the Messiah is not done with hands, but it's the putting off of sins, the old life. And then he talks about being buried with him in baptism. And back in Romans, he goes into great detail about actually being buried with the Messiah and leaving the old man behind in the grave. That's the circumcision. That's the new heart. Cutting away of the old heart, giving us the stony heart, giving us a new heart, walking in newness of life. That is serving in newness of spirit, not oldness of the letter, being circumcised, a spiritual circumcision. But is that a new concept? We read about a new heart and a new spirit. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 10. Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 16. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. Stiff-necked, hard-hearted. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. Deuteronomy chapter 30. I'm going to start in verse 1. And this is filled with, I guess you could say, prophetic significance. Chapter 30 and verse 1. Well, it says, and it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind amongst all the nations, whether Yahweh thy Elohim hath driven thee, and shalt return unto Yahweh thy Elohim, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thine heart and with all thine soul, that then Yahweh thy Elohim will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations, whether Yahweh thy Elohim hath scattered thee. If any of thine be driven out unto the outmost parts of heaven, from thence will Yahweh thy Elohim gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. And Yahweh thy Elohim will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good, and multiply thee above thy fathers. And Yahweh thy Elohim will circumcise thine heart and the heart of thy seed to love Yahweh thy Elohim with all thine heart, with all thine soul, that thou mayest live. It says that he's going to circumcise their heart and their seed to love him. If you love me, keep my commandments. And Yahweh thy Elohim will put all these curses upon thine enemies and on them that hate thee, which persecute thee, and thou shalt return and obey the voice of Yahweh, and do all his commandments, which I command thee this day. And Yahweh thy Elohim will make thee plenteous in every work of thine hand, in the fruit of the body, and in the fruit of the cattle, and in the fruit of the land for good. For Yahweh will again rejoice over thee for good, as he rejoiced over thy fathers, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of Yahweh thy Elohim, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in the book of the law. And if thou turn unto Yahweh thy Elohim with all thy heart and with all thy soul, for this commandment which I command thee this day, it is not hidden from thee, neither is it far off. Another translation says it's not hard, it's not difficult, it's not too far away. Jeremiah chapter 4. We'll close out here in just a minute. Jeremiah chapter 4, starting in verse 1. A call to repentance. If thou wilt return, O Israel, saith Yahweh, return unto me, and if thou wilt put away thine abominations out of my sight, then shalt thou not remove. And thou shalt swear, Yahweh liveth, in truth, in judgment, and in righteousness, and the nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him shall they glory. That's interesting. If they repent, the nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him shall they glory. For thus saith Yahweh to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground, and sow not amongst thorns. Circumcise yourselves to Yahweh, and take away the foreskins of your heart, you men of Judah and inhabitants of Judah, lest my fury come forth like fire, and burn, that none can quench it, because of the evil of your doings. Back to the Spirit and the letter. I want to close out with Matthew chapter 5. Yeshua gave us a very good illustration, several illustrations, of the Spirit and the letter. I'm going to start in verse 20. Of course, in the previous verses, he said, you're the light and the salt. Let your light shine so they can see your good works. I didn't destroy the law. Verse 18, not one jot or tittle has passed from the law. Verse 19, whoever breaks the least of the commandments shall be called least in the kingdom, but whoever does them and teaches them shall be called great. Verse 20, for I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Very interesting way to start off. Well, I've gone over this numerous times about the connection between the salt, the light, the works, the law, and the prophets, and commandments. It's all talking about the same thing. And then he kind of goes into your righteousness exceeding that of the scribes and the Pharisees. It's kind of an interesting compilation of how all these things are put together. The salt, the light, the works, the law and the prophets, the commandments. And then he goes to the religious leaders who know the scriptures very well, with other additional things added to it, of course. And then he starts talking about the Spirit and the letter right after that. Verse 21, you have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill. And whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. So he kind of showed a deeper significance, the root of killing. Even beyond that, to hate someone without cause. Let me, for the sake of time, skip down to verse 27. You have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her, he hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. The letter says, don't commit adultery. And the Spirit says, don't even look at her with that intent. Skip down to verse 33. Again, you have heard that has been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto Yahweh thine oath. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is Yahweh's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. Let's look at verse 38. You have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee turn not thou away. You have heard that it was said, has been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. So both in the Old Testament and the New Testament scriptures, we see a plan and a future significance of being circumcised in the heart, being given a new heart and a new spirit, which causes us to obey his letter. Hallelujah.